I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Welcome to the Thursday night Big Book Study Workshop of the Program of Recovery Keystone Group. My sobriety date's April 8, 1989. I've recovered from the condition that had me once in a hopeless state through the Program of Recovery. Ray will be joining us tonight. Ray, you gonna unmute? We're gonna, I don't know, somebody want to unmute Ray? And then, because I'm really interested to see what he has to say tonight. There you go.
There we go.
So, Ray, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Ray. I'm on the same boat as Tony is. Same life raft.
What's your sobriety date?
Sobriety date's the 19th of October, 1988. 6 months before yours.
6 months before, and you're going to remind me. You remind me of that every time we talk. I notice that 6 months before yours. Did anybody else catch that? So what we're going to do is me and Ray are going to tag team. We're going to go through the book, and we're going to give like our experience and different highlights and stuff like that. And then when you're reading it or you go through the workshop online, you can kind of reflect back and see the highlights and stuff like that, right? Like, there's a lot of information in here. And so I think one of the things that really helped me is the guys hit some of the highlights. That way, when I went back over it, when I was reading it, I got the gist of it. It's like looking at a map, right? And when you see the highway, along the map, you'll have different scenic routes or different things that maybe tourist attractions or different cities and stuff. That's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of lay out this map and our experience with it as we go through here. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that, Ray?
Well, I look at the big book as if it were a treasure map. And what we're doing is we're following the little leads in the guides that they have, and that to finally get to the treasure. And so as we follow this, what we're doing is we're looking at the experience that the authors laid down, and we're attempting to follow their path so we can have the same experience that they have.
And I think that's one of the most amazing things, as where you kind of move from an observer, a listener, to somebody who's having this experience, right? Like 36 years later, the way I look and understand and experience is way different than when I first went through it. But I have the same earnestness and same. It's not. I'm still on the same life and death errand, because you know what? Like, it's critical that I maintain and go through this because I have this daily reprieve. But when I first started it, I really had a whole bunch of opinions, but I really had no idea. I had a lot of useless information. Like, I'm not too sure. Maybe Ray will hit on a bit of his history, but I had 11 years of in and out of the fellowship, thinking I was in a program and gathering information that I thought was pertinent to my recovery as I was cultivating and developing my program of recovery. And so, you hear that language all the time, right? Well, my program for me, and the idea of working on and exerting yourself along these lines and really being diligent and, being on guard and trying to approach this thing like a behavioral problem. I had no idea of the information in here. So my last relapse, I did 360 meetings in 90 days, and I really was convinced that I had it this time, because I wasn't even thinking about it anymore. Like, the thought has left. There was no desire, no nothing. I remember my birthday was on 2 days prior to April 8th, and I remember going to the meeting and thinking what a great job I was doing keeping myself sober this time. And then I went back on the 7th, and on the 8th I got a 3-month chip, talking like I was getting an Academy Award. And I was convinced that it was different. I'm in 4 12 and 12 studies. I did a Novalco, and I couldn't explain anything, but I had a great story around it. And then, an hour later I was drinking, just totally baffled by this thing. So somebody conned me into a big book study, right? I went there thinking I was going to go help them, because they said, man, you're very knowledgeable. You've been around a long time, and why don't you come and help us out? And I checked with my sponsor at the time, and he thought it'd be a good idea that I'd go help them through something that I had no idea about. And they introduced me to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, what we're going to do tonight, and start going through and highlighting some stuff. And they took me through this, and to be honest with you, really kicking and screaming, right? Like really resistant to any information other than what I've already gathered. And I was in conflict with the information being presented to me based on my own understanding and the stuff that I was gathered. So it took a lot for me to start conforming to the ideas that was being presented and start building the building blocks for me to make my decision in 3, right? And that's our job. What me and Ray's going to do is get people there. But what got you into this course of action, right? What's your story?
Consequences, Tony. and I have a completely different path than what you took. I didn't sober up until I was 47 years old. And that was a struggle for me. Here was the struggle. I was told to go to AA meetings in May of 1960, and so I went.
I want to say dang, but I mean, go ahead.
And so I'm in this meeting in St. Paul, Minnesota,
yeah.
and I'm talking to a bunch of old timers, and they're all looking at me, like their jaws are hanging out. And after we talked for a while, they said, we think that you are one of us, but we think that you don't think you're one of us.
Yeah.
And that's what they said. Now, here's what I heard. You can go back and drink. And I thought, well, I know all about research. I know all about experimental designs. I know exactly what I have to do. And so I plowed through this again. And it was another 10 years before I was corralled and told, you need to go back to AA again. I heard the same message. But this time I started to think maybe they have something there. And so that's when I said, I got to stop doing this because this is getting me into too much trouble. And I can remember that when I said that, there was like a little voice in the back of my mind that said, I tell you, you're going to do that. You're going to keep on, but you're going to be able to control it. And so it was another 10 years before I was consigned once again to AA meetings, and still hadn't learned my lesson.
So that's like 20 years. So how old were you when your first meeting was?
My first meeting, I was 19.
Yeah, my first meeting, I was 16.
Yeah.
And we were both dealing with the same thing, our own thinking in regards to this.
Exactly. And then if that's, that course probably is one of the things that you did. I mean, you suffered more consequences than I did. You were probably a hell of a lot deeper into this than I was. But I didn't realize the trouble I was headed for until the last 8 years as I was struggling with this. And the path eventually got to where in 1985, I met up with a nurse that I'd been working with, and she was in Al-Anon and AA and Overeaters Anonymous, and she was dragging me to all these meetings, and I would always tell her, I said, Margaret, I don't understand. When we go to these other meetings, I don't know what the hell they're saying, but when we go to AA meetings, they're saying what's inside my head. And so from 85 until 88, here I am, I'm struggling with this idea of, and finally I went to treatment. I was at that point where I had nowhere else to go. And I realized then when I was in treatment that this is a problem. I don't know what to do about it. They said, well, here's an AA meeting you should go to. And like Tony, I spent 9 months dying in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous because all I heard was, get a big book, read it, come back tomorrow. We'll go out for coffee and ice cream afterwards. And I was moved across the lake. I was living in New Orleans at that time, and I moved across to Covington. In my first meeting over here, I'm talking, and a bunch of guys are standing around me, just like the old salts that stood around me in 1960, and they started pointing their finger in my nose, and they said, "You're going to die." That kind of thinking, "You're going to die." And I thought, what am I going to do? And one of the guys said, "Come to my house this weekend, and we'll go through this book." He was a big book thumper, and I didn't believe him. I said, "It might work for you, but it's not going to work for me." So I took him up on the deal. I went over there, and we started through these steps. And I can't tell you, with that obstinance and belligerence in my mind, somewhere during these steps, probably around the fifth step, because I finally saw what the hell my life was like as I wrote out my inventory. But in the fifth step, as I was talking about that, I felt something shift within me. And all that defiance, all that belligerence, all that obstinance that I had started to dissipate. And this guy that was taking me through these steps, my sponsor, first sponsor, Rick, he shook his head and he said, "I don't know what's different about you, Ray, but I sense that there is something different as we were taking these steps." And I can't tell you, to me, it was the hand of His power, I call God, that was on me at that time. But my life changed from that time point, and it's steadily improved ever since. But it's a lot different than what Tony is talking about with his experience, because I was into big book studies. Rick was leading a book study, and so I'm into it, and I'm really obstinate in those things, and I really got into it. I made a lot of enemies. I still make a lot of enemies, but I made a lot of enemies starting off because I was really hard-nosed and rigid in what was in the book. Now I've realized what the authors are saying. They're not preaching at us. They're just sharing their experience. But that's in a general way the path that got me here, Tony.
And you stayed sober from that point on?
I stayed sober. I did all my relapsing before I walked into AA.
See, well, before you started the course of action, because you came left, right?
Well, those 9 months that I was, as I said, I'm in the rooms of AA dying. I mean, the thought of drinking was, by God, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink, and it's that white knuckling, grabbing the steering wheel and not letting go. That was the only thing that I felt saved me from taking a drink.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the same thing, but that, like, later on when we talk from a place of experience. So if you're new listening to it, you're kind of wondering, well, what the hell's going on? And the progression of alcoholism, as you learn this language, you get to determine where you are in that progression. So when Ray said a little more consequence, a little more diligent, like the illness was a little more paramount at first within me, but as time went on, it became very paramount to bring Ray back to AA. And that seems to be a lot of our themes. From 1968 to 1989 is when you sobered up, right?
Yes, 88.
So that's a big gap. Something got your attention. So what has us staying here is what we're going to get into tonight. We both got 12-step into the program of alcoholics from the fellowship, from members who took interest in us, right? So what started happening before we even realized it, we were embraced by the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous and responsible members who took interest in us and started guiding us and walking us into a direction, a path. And as we started to have this experience, a change started to happen, mostly that became aware of the people around us. And then as time went on, we became aware of that, mostly through how we were handling life, a shift within inside of us, and the being able to sustain longer periods of sobriety than we ever have prior to doing this, right? So when we get where we're at now, we're going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to walk your interest, has you here to investigate. Obviously, you heard something, or your experience has you here to enhance or to learn. You're in a position of, because there's nothing in a meeting that will create change. All it will do is create investigation. that maybe I need to pursue a new idea or a new path or a new group of people. And so we're here tonight. And so when we kind of look at this, we're going to approach this. We have the exact same experience, but we explain it differently, right? It took members to intervene in our life that we both got into this book, and we've both been sober ever since. Kind of interesting, regardless of our experience around. Me and Ray probably have two different backgrounds altogether, right? And if we talked about what it was like, we would both be like, what are you doing here? But when we talk about what we were like in regards to the affliction of this illness, we're exactly the same. Inability to get sober, inability to change our life, inability to see the devastation that we're causing or feel, right? We have the consequences. And then when people started to explain it to us, we had a different experience. So that brings us to the first page in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. If everybody wants to turn to the title page, it's kind of interesting. And we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna kind of wing this. We're gonna kind of go through. We're gonna bring our experience to it, and hopefully it'll be in a way where it enhances or allows you to pursue, walk with us, so you can have your own experience or enhance what you already have. I think that sounds like a good idea. How many people are into that? Like let's walk together. Let's do this, right? Because 36 and 30, that's a long time. Two collective experience along the same line, right? That's a long period of time. So when I work in the industry that I work in, some of those long timers in there that have been in the industry I work, they have a lot of tidbits and a lot of understanding, because we all build the same sets. We all have the same collective idea how we do things, how they go about incorporating that. They'll have this idea of that, and we go, wow. So it enables us to do our job better. And that's kind of like recovery. When we learn certain principles or certain ideas or certain applications along the same lines, what it does is enhances our own sobriety, right? The ability to see things differently. In order to see things differently, sometimes you need another person. Like when people say, nothing's going right. Well, start going left then. Right? What the hell? Stupid stuff like that. So title page, what do you got there, Ray? What's on your title page? Let's see if we got the same book.
The story of how many thousands of men and women recovered from alcoholism. And that's, in essence, what this book is. It is a story of how these alcoholics had recovered from alcoholism. And included in that are other stories of people that they're using to give as examples to point this out, how they recovered from alcoholism.
Do you think they all have the same story?
Oh, if you look at it on a general theme, many of them have the same story as they move toward recovery. But they're all different on how they got there, just like you and me. We're totally different on our approach and our entry into AA. But our story is going to be the same as we start looking at this wacko mind of ours.
Well, like when you look at the thread of alcoholism, it's the same, right? How that is expressed in our lives may be different, but it's exactly the same. That's what I mean by all these people, all different walks of life, all different experience, right? Where Ray grew up, I grew up, that's kind of adds to the story, but the underlying theme is this thing, how they recover is alcoholism, right? It has the same component in both of our lives, regardless of where we're raised, our demographics and all that other. So here they're saying there's over 1,000 of them that are having the same story. They were afflicted with this illness and they recovered from it. What's the beauty of it? If you've never been to a meeting and you looked at this, it would be pretty exciting news that maybe I could recover from this thing that I may be afflicted with that I'm investigating at this point in time, right? If you've been to meetings, you're already arguing, some of you, with the idea of being recovered because you're influenced by other people's ideas, right? And so a lot of us are struggling with what we were taught or what we learned or what we believe instead of being open to what it says, right? So this is a book from Alcoholics Anonymous, and the theme so far is the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. Do we know what they're talking about, Ray?
I do.
Now,
I hope you do.
But at this stage of the game, if you were new, would you know
If I was new, I can remember the first time I opened this book. And I read this and I thought, well, let's see what they have to say. And I do like I always read all books. I turned to the back and I read the last page. And if that caught my interest, then I would read the book. And I was absolutely amazed. I read the last page and I thought, sounds a little interesting. But when I read the book, it didn't mean anything to me the first time through.
Yeah, I didn't even read that page. I went to read how it works, and I was looking for me in it. So
you didn't find yourself, did you?
No, I didn't understand what it said, so I stopped reading it, right? Well, actually, that's not true. I've never really read the big book before that. All I would read is those segments in a meeting that they would put in. You know what? They take it out of the book, and you'd read segments of it now, right? Like, let's take this.
This nurse that I was running around with, she had a big book, and she left it at the house. And I used it as a coaster for my coffee cup. And I had that book right up to is about a year ago that the book walked away. But it had this huge, almost like a coffee cup stain in the blue of that book. And man, I'd love to have that book back. But it was more of a coaster than it was something to read.
Well, I still have my second edition here. And it's stained from the outside, and if you try to open it up, it still make crinkle noises. Okay. When I got back in 1978 at my first meeting. Okay, so let's look at the preface. We're going to hit some highlights here. So this is the story, this interesting part. My wife pointed out when I read that, she says, what's the most important part of that? I said the recovered part. But it's actually the story, because the more you understand the story, the more amazing this idea is, or this experience is that they're talking about. It's like, wow. Like, the more you understand a story, and then you see the result of it, it's kind of like watching those court cases, right? What does the judge want to know? The story. And some of that stuff is pretty amazing stories out of what happens out of situations, right? Whether people get acquitted or insanity or whatever the situation. But this is a pretty remarkable story when you understand the basis of it. So when we get to the preface, is that right? They talk about...
I call it preface.
Preface?
You call it preface.
Okay, let's look at a highlight here. Let's look at the second paragraph. Did you wanna read that down to?
Yeah, this is on page Roman numeral 11. If you have a third edition or fourth edition book, I mean, and it says, because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume, describing the AA recovery program, has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. Section called... Go ahead, Tony.
So the guys who took me through it said it was my responsibility to read it. And they'd read this, and then they'd ask me questions. It says, where would one find the AA recovery program? I would say, what? In the first portion. I said the first 164 pages. He says, where do you see that? The guys who said words are important, right? They're very specific where one would find the AA recovery program. It would be in the first portion, right? So,
now, one of the things that we have to remember, Tony, is that in the very first print, the first edition, that the doctor's opinion started on page 1. So there were no Roman numerals in the text at that time. It was still the doctor's opinion, and then chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, etc., up to chapter 11. But it started on page 1. I mean, so the first portion was easy, when it said read that, because you could read then from page 1, or if you wanted to read the preface at that time was very minor, all the way through page 187, I believe.
Yeah, but like I wasn't very educated. I come off the streets of Toronto. I was raised in a home that did their best, but there was a lot of alcohol and other stuff going on in there. I'm not going to get into their story, but I was very. They talk about later on the countless lives of warped children, right? I'm one of those that grew up in that atmosphere and then created my own story. So I had their story, my story, and it was one hell of a story by the time I got here trying to deal with this thing, trying to unravel it all. There's a lot of going on up here, right? And so they would slow it down and say, well, what's the basic tax? And I didn't know what they meant by that. Tax, what do you mean by tax? And so they would explain it to me as, say, Ray, if I was going to say, what do you mean by that, Ray? A text, what do they mean by that?
It's like a written manuscript, in essence. That's the real meaning of the word text. So the basic text would be the original manuscript, but they're saying here, the book now that they put together, not only the basic text, I mean the manuscript, that they put together in the first portion of this book, as well as the stories. This has become the basic text that we have. And so it's divided into two sections. We have a basic text, which is the recovery portion, and then we have the stories, which is the second part of the book.
So that's pretty interesting. So this is the only book Alcoholics Anonymous endorses as the outline of the AA program for recovery.
That is correct.
Is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So then when you get into all these other books, you'd have to read the preface to see what they're designed for, right? And the purpose. And we'll get into that a little later, right? Of these different books that have taken over in a lot of places as the program of recovery that isn't having the same success rate of those who are going through this. But I don't want to ruin the surprise today, but we'll visit it later, right? Because, we've been able to keep some numbers here. We get into it too much, we might drop down to 20 on the first meeting. So we're going to ease into it. So how many people usually write a textbook?
Wait a minute, ask the question again, Tony?
Yeah, how many people usually write a textbook?
Well, it depends on how many authors you invite to write the textbook. I mean, a lot of the textbooks that I read, there might be 38 chapters written by 38 different people. But there is one main author, like Bill Wilson was the main author of this, but there are a lot of different contributions within this text itself. So as we look at a textbook, it depends. If there's a single author, he's written all of the chapters in that particular book. But in this case, they're anonymous, so we don't know who wrote it.
Yeah, what it was explained to me, and it made sense to where we're going with this. When they asked me how many people write a text, I said usually a math book or something. Usually it's one person that gathers information from other people that they'll give credit to, but they're the ones that kind of put it together. Like when my wife put her papers together for her master's degree, she wrote the paper based on information and put it in such a way that it kind of created a different idea about that. And some of the reference points she'll make to the book she read to come up with those ideas, but her paper was based on her, one person, right? And she wrote it, and then all the professors looked at it, and they reviewed it, and then they said whether it needed some corrections, and hers went without any corrections or anything. They deliberated on it for a long period of time. And I'm not really educated. Right? You'll find out as you go along. I stumble with the English language where I was learning all that, and I have a bit of damage that I still quite enjoy. But it's okay. We'll get through this. So forward to the first edition. Let's see who put this together, right? Because that's kind of interesting. If we're going to look at a basic text, and we're going to look at this story that they're talking about of how many thousands of men and women, and since more, have recovered from this thing. Let's see who kind of put it together, where these thousands got the idea, right, on what the problem was, the solution, and the course of action they took to be able to make that statement on the title page in the fourth edition. right? Obviously, it had to start from somewhere. So, which is great about the forewords and the preface, it gives us the lineage, right? And how this started, and the development, the story of Alcoholics Anonymous and the big book of Alcoholics. It's pretty cool, right? You hear a lot of people, when they speak, they make, right, well, my sponsor was Clancy, my lineage is this person. Now, our lineage is the first 100 men and women. Our lineage is the people that put this together. My sponsor is a guide. The people who actually are sponsoring me through this is the people that put this together. Because I'm getting the collective information. Might have got ahead of myself. Go ahead, Ray.
Okay, no, that's the foreword to the first edition. And this is the foreword. It appeared in the first printing of the first edition, which was April the 10th of 1939.
Damn. When you think of those numbers, right? 1939, right?
1939.
And there's been no radical changes being made in it, right?
None. Well, there are changes, but they're not radical changes.
That's right.
So the first paragraph is very interesting because it's a very quick overview of the book. We of Alcoholics Anonymous, and now remember, these are the authors that are writing this. We of Alcoholics Anonymous.
So they're not bilingual, right? There's a group of them. Okay, go ahead.
There might be. Might have been.
Might be, okay.
But there are more than 100 men and women who recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Now, one little aside on that is that when the book was actually published, there were no women that were in. The one woman that they had in the program committed suicide before the book was published. And as a result, then when they wrote it, there's no women, but women really flocked in after the book was published. So
they were hopeful. They were hopeful.
Very hopeful. Yeah. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we recovered is the main purpose of this book. Anything in italicized printing here in the first printing, first edition, it was in bold capital letters, so it just literally jumps off the page at you.
So
to show other alcoholics precisely how we recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we're sure that our way of living has its advantages for all.
And what's really cool out of that, when you look at how many different 12-step based fellowships there are.
Over 200 now.
It was just pretty amazing with this recipe that was put together that we'll get into. But what's really interesting here is they're not going to tell us how for us to recover. They're not talking to us. They're going to show us how they recovered. Mm-hmm. Totally different conversation on their experience, how they recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And to show other alcoholics precisely, what does precisely mean? Is there wiggle room in that? Precisely. Precision.
No, it means exactly.
Exactly. So is that open to interpretation?
No. No, not one bit.
So you hear people say that, though.
Except we interpret it the way we want to. And it goes totally against what the authors have said.
So what really helped me back when I look back was the guy who was 12-stepping me without realizing, he says, Tony, he says it's hard to have, we have a two-sided conversation here. He says, I'm talking about an experience I've had, and you're talking about an experience that you've yet to have. I'm applying spiritual principles, and you're still applying you to you. He says, my job is to get you through this where we can have the same experience and we can talk about applying these spiritual principles in our lives, right? So he talked about, right now, you're having a singular experience when you need to be having a collective experience, right? You need to be a part of this fold that they talk about. That's what I meant earlier, that if you were to hear these 100 people speak at a meeting, 100 different meetings, would they sound all different or would they all sound the same?
They should all sound the same.
They sound the same based on what the problem is, based on what the solution is, and based on the course of action they took and the results of. And that's how me and Ray started this introduction to our workshop here, is even though we have two different lives, if he talked about, his academics and his education is probably up there. He probably has some degrees on the wall. Me, no degrees on the wall. No, my mom was laughing. I talked to my mom on the way home from work all the time. And she was reminding me the time she, opened the paper and there I was, right? I won't get into the story. That was everybody's education about me. Is, my God, that's my son in the Toronto Star, right? So when people describe my education, it was a street level based education, right? By people who were also of my type. So if me and Ray had a conversation, it would be two different things altogether, right? And that was the same with the guys who 12-stepped me. But when they talked this language, they got my attention.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tony, that there may be a difference in the way that we have entered into AA, but you talking about your sponsor, I was going to ask the question, did he have a brother? Because my sponsor talked exactly the same way as your sponsor talked to you. Yeah. Because I'm trying to do the same thing. He's talking about his experience, and I'm trying to talk to him about, well, I could or I should. And he said, you have nothing to stand on. This was the hardest thing for me, because I can see into the future. I can project, except I couldn't live that.
So when they talk about a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, they're talking about two things. There's not three things there. Because a lot of people add ideas based on other people's ideas, right? And other people's sponsorship and their influence, whether they wrote a book or they work in a treatment center, or their sponsor wrote a book and worked in a treatment center and they passed those ideas down, right? And now what a lot of people do is represent the ideas that were passed on to them and not the ideas presented in the basic text. So what happens is, what a basic text is, if you're getting the right ideas, as you go along, everybody should have the same information. And that's what they're getting at. Later on, they'll ask us, do you have the same information that we do? And if you do, then we can move forward. If you don't have the same information as us, then you can't move forward. And the problem within our fellowship today, not everybody has the same information, right? But when they do get the same information, then they're given the opportunity to recover like we did. Like I spent 11 years in and out till somebody gave me this information and took me through this course of action, which is the same experience as the first person who started this. Somebody had to get their attention, right? Present certain ideas that we'll get into in a minute and walk them through a course of action. They didn't go through it alone. Somebody took them through it to have the experience that was being presented to them that they witnessed. So I don't know what they mean by a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. But now I understand the purpose of this book is to show other alcoholics precisely how they have recovered. So my job as the reader is to go through to try to understand what they're presenting, yes? And then they have history here forward to the second edition, which is a lot of really good information, right? Mm-hmm. And as they go through this, they start heading in, then they go forward to the third edition, which again is a lot of information, and forward to the fourth edition. There's a lot of history and a lot of info. I don't know if you want to touch on anything specific there, but there's a really lot of good stuff. And a lot of times people talk about the statistics, right? And they talk about Roman numeral, I think it's 20, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Roman numeral 20.
And they talk about the statistics, how AA is falling apart, and it's, and when you read the statistics, if you read what it says AA is having the same success rate today as it did back then, if the AA members are doing what we're supposed to be doing, right? If you're in a group that's is tradition based, then you're given the same opportunity to every person that comes in here. And one of the things they talk about here is trying to diminish the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, what that means is I wasn't in a group that was tradition based or or recovery based for 11 years. As weird as that may sound, because of outside influences. But when I got involved in a group that was big book based, those people took interest in me, right? And they presented the ideas that we're going to get into here in a minute. And I participated and I recovered, which is the story of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? We carry this message. We don't go find it. There's a big difference. And if we're doing our job, then people experience what they talk about here on page Roman numeral. Did you want to go through that?
It says of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. Those are the two key words in there. Really tried. Without a desire, you're not going to want to try. And so that's why we ask you, do you have a desire to change your life?
But also, it says of alcoholics who came to AA.
Of alcoholics.
Not everybody who came to AA. Big difference. Right?
So they're actually singling out the alcoholic, not just anyone who walks in the door. The difference at that time was that they sought alcoholics. They went to the jails, they went to the hospitals, they went to institutions, and they pulled them into AA. And so they had alcoholics that were in AA. And of those alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once.
Which is amazing for our demographic of people, because you can't tell us shit.
Yeah.
Right? We're all waiting for, can I share now? Can I give you my opinion? Can I give you my ideas? Can I tell you what I'm doing? Can I tell you about me? And we're trying to talk later when
see that eliminates them from really trying.
Yeah. Well,
they just want to be able to control it. I don't want to suffer the consequences like I used to.
Well, later we get into, if you're not educated on it, then anything makes sense. Our job is to educate, right? It wasn't until Bill got educated on this. He went through treatment the third time. The third time he was educated on what the problem was, what the solution was being presented, and the possibility of means of recovery. And he went through this thing, and he had a different experience that this whole thing is built on, right?
That's an interesting choice of words, Tony, because a lot of people, when we say educate, they think we're teaching or we're preaching. That to educate means that you yourself are really involved in this. Bill got educated. Yeah, Ebby came and talked to him. Other people talked to him, but it was Ebby who instilled in him that desire to want to get sober and stay sober.
Well,
he got educated
hope,
by
right?
Ebby's
He's seen
experience.
the hope, right? He's seen the hope, right? But we'll get into that again. So they talk about here, this is interesting. Keep reading.
It said, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sober up after some relapses. And among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Interesting statistics. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program.
Other thousands came to AA meetings. So you say, we're not successful because they're not staying. Well, they haven't had the step one experience. They're not convinced that they need to do this. And they're kind of having a consequence problem, not a drinking problem. And they haven't had that place of being educated to see the severity of their situation. So when Ray was talking earlier, as he was talking, where we are in the spectrum of the illness is a lot of people don't know. Like when Ray was talking, he was saying, I was more advanced in the spectrum of the illness of this malady that we'll get into later compared to his experience. But then he got to that place where the illness was upon him, where it was kind of like dying within the rooms, because he knew to leave would be his own detriment, but he had nowhere else to go. until he got 12 step. You see that's kind of getting to that place, right? They call it the gift of desperation, but it's not a gift if you're still in a place of desperation without any hope, right? It's just desperation, right? And desperation in itself doesn't change anything. It's like somebody who's drowning, right? You can know you're drowning, you could surrender to the fact you're drowning, but unless you get somebody to pull you from the water, you're pretty much hooped. And that's like alcoholism. Just because you're in a meeting doesn't mean you're saved from the fate that you're in, right? That's where this message comes in. So, what I wanted to touch base on, that's interesting. So, the statistic thing is interesting. I always found it interesting. And when I say this, it's the same today, meaning if people are given the opportunity and they fall in the AA design group of the triangle with the circle, their success rate falls within those. If they fall into one of those other self-help meetings that fall outside of the traditions, because there's a lot of meetings within the fellowship that fall outside of the traditions. But I'm not going to get into that today. We'll keep that for a surprise for another day. But I wanted to get into the doctor's opinion, the introduction to the witnessing of the miracle of the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of people say, oh, it was when Bill called Dr. Bob. It happened before that. It happened of the witnessing that this doctor seen happening in his facility, right? And so I won't get into the whole history, but this here sets up this conversation of what this whole thing is built on, right? It's the beginning of like, whoa, this is quite the story, right? So let's see what this doctor says, because we need to understand what they mean by a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And you notice they didn't ask you what you think. They said, what do you think they mean by that? They won't ask you that. They're going to explain what they mean by that, and we'll start here. Doctor's opinion.
Now, when we look at the doctor's opinion, everyone thinks that he's talking about the opinion of these that are drinking. His opinion really comes at the end of the chapter when he talks about this recovery program, and that's what this is all geared to. His opinion of this recovery program that is presented in this book. Doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Now, these are the authors that are writing this book. This is not Dr. Silkwood that's writing this first paragraph. This is an introduction.
Can we hold it there for a second? This is the interesting part, too, is that all these people are kind of given their combined experience, what they believe will be very helpful for people like us. Right? Because they've been given all these different methods and ideas that we'll see through here, all their different experience. So there's a group of them that's sitting together and saying, yeah, we've tried all these other things and it don't seem to work for people of our type. That we need to explain how we're different than these other people that seem to recreate their lives. So they're saying, we think you'll be interested in what we found very interesting. Right? Get that? Does that kind of set the tone?
And when we look at the New York group, most of them were treated by Dr. Silkworth at Towns Hospital. Those in Akron were separate from this. Those were states away. But in New York, most of them were treated by Dr. Silkworth. And so what we're looking at really is a collective of those people that are writing this because they had been treated by Silkworth. And so we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader of this book will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery that's described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. They're telling us that they were treated at other hospitals, but were eventually shuttled over to Towns Hospital to be under Dr. Silkworth's care. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital, specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. Now, what's interesting in that sentence is that he never talks about drug addiction. He treated both. In fact, when he started off his medical practice, he was involved in both alcoholic and drug addiction right from the very beginning. In fact, his father was a flag bearer in the Civil War, never got injured, and I think that his farm that he grew up on might have been a hospital. And so he was well acquainted with seeing these soldiers come in, have arms or legs amputated, using alcohol as an anesthetic and morphine as a pain sedative. And so he was well versed then in this, what's going on in the individual. And so he's a chief physician now at Towns Hospital, a nationally prominent hospital, specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction. And he gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. That's his entire career. He graduated from med school in 1899. This is 1939 now that the book is published. He said, in late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless.
So hold it there for a second. So he's making a clear distinction between two things going on with this guy. He has the potential of a good earning, but he's suffering from something that doesn't allow him to live up to this potential. And right away, it's like, how many of us, right, have the potential of a good life, good this, good, but there's always something that seemed to diminish our ability to live up to our potential or the opportunities that we've been given. Something else is determining our story than the story that we're trying to determine. Anybody? Right? The story that's being created is different than the story I want.
And see, I can identify with Bill because in the same capacity. And I figured that in what I was in, it could easily get my way out of any kind of trouble that I had, except when it came to alcohol. I was able to overcome other obstacles, but when it came to alcohol, that had me stymied. And I can understand exactly when he said he had come to regard him as hopeless, because I can remember that absolute feeling of hopelessness at the end. So in the course of his third treatment, now this is so we're talking about Bill. In the course of his third treatment.
How many treatments?
That's the third treatment. And it's interesting. That not the first treatment, not the second, but in the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. Now, notice, Silkworth doesn't say he got the ideas from me. I think this, as we start talking in Bill's story, we'll come back and revisit this. But in his third treatment, something had happened between treatment 2 and treatment 3 where he acquired certain ideas as a possible means of recovery. And so as part of his rehabilitation, this is Bill taking this on as part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. And this is an interesting word, conception. If those of you who are married understand when we say conception, well, it's very similar to what we're talking about here. You have an idea and a plan that comes together, and you develop something from that. In this case, it was the plan of recovery, the course of recovery. And so he commenced to present that conception to other alcoholics, impressing upon them they must do likewise with still others. And that's become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. And this man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. Now, it's interesting. Dr. Silkworth uses the word recovered to describe these alcoholics. In other words, he's seen them when they come in. He's seen them when they've sobered up. And he's seen them change as they have lived this program of recovery. And he notices they've recovered from this illness of mind and body.
And he goes on to finish the impact statement. I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely, which was Bill. I read it kind of like he sees Bill coming back to his facility. We find out it's Bill. He comes to regard this guy as hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
But he acquired certain ideas, right? And so this doctor's like, okay, yeah, here you are for the third time. What I've presented to you the first and second time hasn't taken root. I've been successful with a lot of other people, but I've never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. And he's talking about down here too. Other people have been through his facility, who've tried other methods, but don't seem to work. He's watching this person who he regards as hopeless put these conceptions into actual practice that somebody else is walking him through. He has an experience and this doctor's witnessing it. And he can't argue. He sees the evidence right in front of him, and then he allows them to start working with other people. That is a pretty amazing story when you look at the introduction of this thing as really the first page to the beginning of this story. We've watched...
Well, even more amazing, Tony, if you look at that sentence, I personally know scores of cases who are of the type that other methods had failed completely. He's actually talking about his own treatment not working on these alcoholics. I mean, that's a bold statement for physicians to say, I can't do anything for you.
So imagine within our own fellowship, right? That people call the program. But within our own fellowship, how many other methods are being presented within our own fellowship? Right? So like huge. How many of us have been presented with other ideas, like 12 and 12 based recovery, or just living sober, or just this?
I think we get it all the time, Tony.
Drop the rock.
It's hard to stick with a singleness of purpose, but that's our job, is to try and stick to that singleness of purpose.
100% is to keep within the guide of the traditions. That's what I'm saying. A tradition-based meeting will ensure that this message is being carried. Our primary purpose is to carry this message. Personal recovery depends upon any unity, but you can't carry something you haven't done. And if you're sitting in a 12 and 12 meeting and you haven't been through this, then you can't carry this message. You're carrying the idea of somebody else's experience. If you're reading some book outside of AA and carrying it in AA, like everybody started talking about dropping the rock, or was it picking up the rock, or smoking the rock, something like that. I forget what it was. But they're this other ideas of look, we new and improved, right? But yet here's something that was written in 1939, but started in 1934. So it's pretty wild. The beginning of this thing started in the hospital in 1934, being witnessed by a doctor, which is pretty amazing. And it started to grow from there. And it hasn't had radical changes being made in it to the first printing of the book in 1939, and it hasn't really changed. That's kind of mind-boggling, because we change everything. We get our hands on it and we try to improve something. It's like a safety pin is the same as it was when it was first invented. There's no improving it.
And you see, what's really interesting in what you just said, Bill sobered up in December of 1934. The book was published in April of 1935. 4 years, and they write this book. And 4 years in writing a book that literally has stood the test of time.
Newcomers.
This is still the recovery program.
Newcomers writing the big book. Unbelievable when you think about it, right?
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't trust a lot of new people with my car, never mind my life. Anyhow, we're getting there. I don't know. You got any closing remarks there, or
I'm going to leave it up to you, Tony.
So yeah, this is kind of how we're going to go through this, right? We're going to enhance and kind of keep going and kind of build on stuff and go back and forth and add our experience to it. Try to make it. And if you know people, invite them, be a part of. Let's walk through this together. We have the 7th tradition, our meetings, everything posted in the chat. We'll have a Q&A after this meeting for those that are interested, and we'll just carry on. We got the World Convention coming next week here. So, we'll be the envy of everybody. So it's awesome. And no, I'm not speaking. I know. I wonder why too. No, anyways, we'll practice some humility now, and we'll close with the serenity prayer for those who wish. What makes for a good life, Ray?
God,
grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Live long and prosperous. May the force be with you. See you guys next week.
All right, Tony.